I still remember the smell of my father's old study, a mix of pine wood and dust, the faint echo of his pipe tobacco lingering in the air. It was the room where he made every important decision of his life, and that morning, it was where my brother, David, looked at me like I was an inconvenience he couldn't wait to erase. "I don't think you can handle it, Emma," he said, his tone clipped and cool. "Dad's property is complicated. The taxes, the maintenance, the tenants. It's not really your thing." I froze, holding the edge of the worn oak desk that had once been our father's pride. My heart thudded in my chest. The will had been read an hour ago. Dad had split the property equally between us, the old family house and the adjacent farmland. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about legacy, about everything Dad built with his own two hands. But to David, it was about control. He stood across from me in his neatly pressed suit, the gold of his cufflinks glinting under the weak sunlight that filtered through the blinds. Everything about him screamed confidence, the kind that bordered on arrogance. He'd always been like that, the golden child, the one who went to college, started his own business, bought the big house in the city. Meanwhile, I stayed home, took care of Dad when his health began to fail, and kept the property running. "I can handle it, Emma," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been doing it for years." He gave a soft laugh, the kind that makes your stomach twist. "Handling Dad's errands and paying a few bills isn't the same as managing an estate, Emma. You don't know the half of what it takes." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but what hurt more wasn't his lack of faith in me. It was how quickly he'd turned this into a power play. Dad wasn't even gone 3 weeks, and already David was talking like everything belonged to him. When he slid the papers across the desk, I stared down at them in disbelief. "What's this?" I asked. "It's just a transfer of rights," he said casually, tapping the folder. "It'll make everything easier. You'll still have a share, but I'll handle the finances, the upkeep, the paperwork. It's just practical." I hesitated. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Something in my gut told me not to sign. But then I looked at him, my brother, the same boy who used to chase me around the yard with a garden hose, the one who stood next to me at Dad's funeral, his arm around my shoulder when I cried. Maybe he really did just want to help. Maybe he knew something I didn't. "David, are you sure this is fair?" He smiled, that charming, reassuring smile I'd seen him use on clients and family alike. "Of course. You trust me, don't you?" And that was the moment I made the mistake that would change everything. I signed. The pen glided across the page, black ink sealing a decision I didn't fully understand. David took the folder back with practiced ease, slipping it into his leather briefcase. "Good," he said. "This'll make things smoother for both of us." Then he stood up and buttoned his jacket and left, without looking back. The silence that followed felt heavier than any grief I'd known. I stood there staring at the door he'd walked through, the echo of his words replaying in my head. "You can't handle it." For the rest of the day, I moved like a ghost through the house, through the kitchen where Mom used to bake pies on Sundays, through the hallway lined with fading family photos. Every step I took reminded me that something was missing, and it wasn't just my father. It was trust. It was respect. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the evening light spill over the fields. The farmland stretched endlessly, gold and green under the dying sun. It was beautiful, peaceful, but now it didn't feel like mine. I felt like a guest in my own life. That night, I found myself in Dad's study again. His old leather chair creaked when I sat down. On the desk, beside a pile of yellowed notebooks, was a small wooden box with a brass latch. Inside were letters, property receipts, and a single photo. Dad standing between me and David, his arms around both of us. His handwriting was scrawled on the back. "Family is everything. Don't forget that." I pressed the photo to my chest and felt tears sting my eyes. Dad always believed we'd take care of each other. He would have hated what was happening. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the faint wind outside. That's when I heard it, the low growl of an engine. I looked out the window and saw David's car still parked at the end of the driveway. He was on the phone, gesturing, his face tense. It didn't look like someone closing family business. It looked like someone making a deal. Something twisted in my stomach again, that same unease from before. But I pushed it down. I told myself I was just being paranoid. He was my brother. He wouldn't hurt me. Right? Only if I had trusted that feeling. Only if I had looked closer that night. Because within days, I'd learn that my signature, that single moment of trust, had cost me more than I ever imagined.
3 days passed before the phone rang. I was in the kitchen rolling out dough for biscuits, trying to distract myself from the silence that had settled over the house since David left. The flour dusted my hands, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. Then the shrill ring of the old landline shattered it. "Hello?" I answered, wiping my palms on a dish towel. "Is this Mrs. Emma Walters?" The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, but polite. "Yes," I replied slowly. "This is Clara from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding the property at 42 Maple Creek Road. There's a notice here that the title was recently transferred. We just wanted to confirm your awareness and authorization." My chest tightened. "Yes, I signed something for my brother," I said, uncertainty creeping into my voice. "It was just a management transfer." There was a pause. Then Clara spoke again, her tone shifting slightly, cautious now. "Mrs. Walters, according to our records, the property was transferred entirely to Mr. David Walters as the sole owner. Your name was removed from the deed." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world went quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding in my ears. "That can't be right," I said softly. I didn't sign away ownership. My words stumbled. "He said it was for convenience." "I understand, ma'am, but the document is legal and complete. It was filed the same day it was signed." "Filed?" I whispered. "Already?" "Yes, it's official." I hung up the phone before she could say anything else. The room spun around me. The kitchen, warm and familiar, suddenly felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Because in a way, it did. I sank into the nearest chair, my hands trembling. I could still see David's confident smile, the way he'd said, "You trust me, don't you?" My stomach turned. I'd trusted him with everything, and he'd taken everything in return. Hours passed before I moved again. When I finally did, it was to pull out the folder of old paperwork from Dad's study. I needed to see the truth for myself. The will clearly stated equal ownership. I reread every line, every clause, searching for a loophole, but there was none. Dad had been fair, as always. David had gone around it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made my heart jump. The creak of the floorboards, the wind brushing against the shutters. It felt like the house itself was mourning what had been stolen. I walked through each room, running my fingers along the walls, whispering, "I'll fix this, Dad. I promise." By morning, resolve replaced shock. I wasn't going to let David's betrayal be the final word. I dressed, packed my father's will, and drove into town to see the lawyer who'd handled the estate, Mr. Collins, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd known our family for decades. When I stepped into his office, he looked up from his papers with kind eyes. "Emma," he said, standing to greet me, "I was wondering when you'd come." That caught me off guard. "You were?" He sighed and gestured for me to sit. I received a notice from the county registrar. David filed the transfer almost immediately. I thought you might not have realized the full implications. My heart sank. So it's true. He took it all. I'm afraid so. He folded his hands on the desk, expression heavy with sympathy. And because you signed voluntarily, it'll be difficult to contest. Unless, he hesitated, unless we can prove coercion or deception. I nodded slowly, the reality setting in. He deceived me, I said, voice trembling. He told me it was for convenience. That's something, Mr. Collins said softly, but we'll need evidence, witnesses, records, anything that shows intent. I bit my lip. Evidence. David had been careful, too careful. Still, something told me I hadn't seen the whole picture yet. As I left the office, I passed by the old community board outside. Among the faded posters and event notices, one flyer caught my eye. An announcement for a real estate development meeting. The company name printed across the top made my heart drop. Walters and Pine Construction. David's company. And underneath, proposed project, Maple Creek Estates. That was our property. He wasn't just taking it. He was selling it. Turning Dad's land, the place where we grew up, into a luxury housing development. My hands shook as I gripped the paper tighter. That's when the anger hit. Not the loud kind, but the deep, cold kind that comes from heartbreak. All those years we spent running through the fields, fishing in the pond, building tree houses in the woods, he was erasing it all. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. I parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the house. I thought of Dad, his words, his values, his belief in family above all else, and I knew what I had to do. I walked inside, pulled out a notepad, and began to write down every memory, every detail, every lie. Dates, times, conversations. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes blurred with tears. If David wanted to play games with money and power, he could. But I had something stronger. The truth. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the boy who used to build forts with me in the backyard. When had greed turned him into a stranger? That night, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent and heavy. But I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Because people like David, they always made one mistake. And when they did, I'd be ready.
2 days later, I drove to David's office. The rain had started early that morning, soft at first, then relentless, soaking the streets and blurring the windshield. The gray sky seemed to match the heaviness in my chest. As I sat in the car, staring at the glass doors of Walters and Pine Construction, I could see his name etched in gold letters. David had always liked things that glittered. I wondered if he realized how easily gold could tarnish. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the rain. My shoes splashed through puddles as I crossed the lot and pushed open the door. The lobby was sleek. Glass walls, marble floors, the faint hum of success. But beneath the shine, I felt something hollow. A young receptionist looked up. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, voice steady. "Tell David Walters his sister is here." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Of course. One moment." She made the call, then looked back up. "He'll see you." When I walked into his office, David was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out over the rain-soaked city. His reflection in the glass looked older, or maybe guilt had aged him. "Emma," he said without turning around, "you shouldn't have come here." "Why not?" I replied, shutting the door behind me. "Afraid I'll make a scene?" He turned slowly. His expression was calm. Too calm. "I know you're upset, but this is business, not personal." "Business?" I echoed, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You stole our father's land and call it business?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're being dramatic. You signed it over willingly." "Because you lied," I shot back. "You told me it was for management convenience. You said—" "I said what you needed to hear, because if I told you the truth, you would have fought me every step of the way, and I don't have time for that." For a moment, I just stared at him. The man standing before me wasn't my brother anymore. He was a stranger wearing his face. "You're building on it," I said. "Turning it into a development?" "Yes," he said, almost proudly. "Maple Creek Estates. The contracts are signed, investors are lined up, it'll be worth millions." "And Dad's memory?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "What's that worth, David?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Memories don't pay bills, Emma. I did what needed to be done." I took a step closer. "You did what you wanted to do. There's a difference." Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe. But it vanished quickly. "You never understood responsibility," he said sharply. "You lived in that old house, clinging to the past. I built something. I made something of myself." "You built it with lies," I whispered. He slammed his hand on the desk. "Enough! I don't owe you an explanation. You signed the paper, and that's the end of it." The sound echoed through the office, leaving a heavy silence. I took a breath, steadying my shaking hands. "You're wrong," I said quietly. "It's not the end. You might have taken the land, but you don't own what it stood for. You don't own Dad's legacy." He laughed bitterly. "Legacy? You think anyone cares about that? This is progress, Emma. You can accept it or keep living in that fantasy of yours." I turned toward the door, but before leaving, I looked back at him. "You know what the difference is between us, David? You think power is in what you own, but real power, it's in what you remember." Then I walked out. When I got home, I sat in the quiet again, but it felt different this time. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was focus. I knew what I had to do next. I pulled out Dad's journals, the ones he used to keep in the wooden chest by his armchair. He'd written about the land, its history, and the people who worked on it. Page after page told stories of families, old workers, and a trust he'd set up decades ago for the community. Then I saw it, a passage I'd never noticed before. Dad had written, "If this land is ever misused, its deed can be challenged under the family trust clause. No signature can void the original intent." My hands trembled as I turned the page. At the bottom was his signature, and the date, notarized and official. I stared at the words, tears filling my eyes. Dad had protected it. Even after death, he'd left a way to make things right. I called Mr. Collins immediately. "You need to see something," I told him. Within hours, I was in his office again, the journal open between us.
He read the page slowly, his brows rising with each line. "Well," he said finally, leaning back in his chair, "this changes everything." "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means," he said with a small smile, "your brother's transfer may not be valid after all. If we can prove the land was meant to stay under the family trust, we can challenge the sale in court." Hope bloomed in my chest for the first time in weeks. "Then let's do it," I said firmly. Mr. Collins nodded. "It won't be easy, but with your father's notes as evidence, we have a strong case." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. For once, the rain didn't feel heavy. It felt cleansing. As I drove home, the clouds began to part, letting streaks of sunlight spill across the road. It felt like Dad was still with me, guiding me, reminding me that truth, no matter how buried, always finds its way back to light. And this time, I was ready to fight.
The courthouse smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and nervous sweat. That strange mix of tension and bureaucracy that makes your heart beat faster no matter how calm you tried to look. I sat in the front row beside Mr. Collins, clutching the leather-bound journal that had belonged to my father. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what that journal represented: truth, justice, and the memory of a man whose word had once meant everything. David was already there when I arrived. He wore his usual expensive suit, the kind that screamed confidence, but his eyes flickered toward me with something else. Irritation, maybe fear. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He gave a tight smile. "Emma, you didn't have to go this far." I met his gaze evenly. "I'm just doing what Dad would have wanted." He smirked. "Dad wanted progress. You're just afraid of change." Before I could respond, the bailiff called the session to order, and we rose as the judge entered. Judge Harris, a stern-looking woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, settled into her chair, tapping her pen against the desk. Case 14-283, Walters versus Walters, a family dispute regarding the ownership of the Maple Creek property. Mr. Collins stood. "Your Honor, we contend that the land transfer made by my client, Miss Emma Walters, was obtained through deception and invalid due to the existence of a prior family trust clause written and signed by the late Mr. Thomas Walters." David's lawyer, a tall man with slicked back hair, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, my client acted in good faith. The deed transfer was legal and voluntary. The plaintiff's claims are based on emotional speculation, not law." Judge Harris raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." Mr. Collins nodded to me. "Miss Walters, please step forward." I took a deep breath and walked to the stand. The courtroom lights felt hot against my face. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Reporters, neighbors, maybe even some of Dad's old friends. "Miss Walters," Mr. Collins began gently, "can you tell the court why you signed over the property to your brother?" I looked at David for a moment, then back to the judge. "Because I trusted him. He said it was just for management convenience, that we'd still share everything. I believed him because he's my brother." Mr. Collins nodded. "And when did you realize that wasn't true?" "When the bank called. They said the property was being developed. That's when I knew he'd lied." "And how did you come across this journal?" "It belonged to my father," I said softly. "He wrote everything in it, his plans, his thoughts, his fears. And in one entry, he made it clear the land was part of a trust. It was meant to stay in the family, for the community, not for profit." Mr. Collins took the journal from me and handed it to the judge. "Your Honor, this is the original document, signed and notarized." The judge flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing as she read the faded handwriting. She paused, her expression softening for just a moment. "Your father's words are clear," she said quietly. "The land's intent cannot be overridden by a simple transfer." David's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. This is not an official legal document.
Judge Harris cut him off. It's notarized and witnessed. That makes it admissible. Objection overruled. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face had gone pale. Mr. Collins stepped forward again. Your Honor, we also have bank records showing that within 48 hours of the transfer, Mr. Walters used the land as collateral for a development loan. He never informed his sister nor provided her with documentation. That's fraud. Plain and simple. David's lawyer stammered, Your Honor, my client. But Judge Harris raised her hand. I've heard enough. She looked at David sharply. Mr. Walters, do you have anything to say? He stood slowly, his composure cracking. I was just trying to make something of it. Dad left us a pile of land that wasn't earning anything. I thought, you thought wrong, the judge interrupted. This was a betrayal of trust, both legal and personal. The court recognizes the family trust clause as binding. The property is to be returned to Miss Walters immediately. Furthermore, all development work is to be halted, pending investigation. The gavel came down like thunder. The room erupted in whispers. I sat there, frozen, tears welling in my eyes as relief washed over me. David turned toward me, his expression unreadable, somewhere between anger and regret. You had to humiliate me, he said bitterly. I looked at him with quiet sadness. No, David, you did that yourself. He didn't reply. He just walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. When I finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean again, fresh and full of promise. Mr. Collins patted my shoulder. You did good, Emma. Your father would be proud. I smiled faintly, looking toward the horizon where the clouds were breaking apart. He already is, I whispered. As I started the engine, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling golden light across the wet pavement. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt free.
It took weeks for the court order to process, but when the deed finally arrived in my name again, I just sat there, staring at it, my hands trembling slightly as I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. It wasn't just paper. It was closure, redemption, and the echo of my father's steady voice telling me I had done the right thing. The next morning, I drove out to Maple Creek. The road was still muddy from the rain, but the air was cool and bright. When I stepped out of the car, a calm silence surrounded me, the kind that hums between the trees and settles softly on your skin. The land stretched out before me, wild and open, dotted with the same oak trees Dad used to rest beneath after long days in the fields. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest here. I belonged. I walked past the old barn, its wood weathered but still strong, and found the small garden my father had planted near the fence. Wildflowers had grown where his rows of vegetables used to be, and a single robin sat on the fence post, chirping into the cool morning. I smiled. Somehow it felt like a sign that life finds its way back, even after betrayal. Over the next few months, I poured myself into restoring what had been lost. The community came together to help. Neighbors brought tools, volunteers cleared the overgrown trails, and a local architect offered to help me design a small community center on the property, a place for kids to learn, families to gather, and old friends to share stories. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about purpose. At night, when the workers had gone home and the stars began to pierce the dark sky, I'd sit on the porch and read through Dad's journal again. His words felt like a map leading me forward. Land doesn't just hold roots, it holds memories. Treat it kindly, and it will outlive you with grace. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering, I hope I'm doing it right, Dad. And in those quiet moments, I swear I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder. 2 months later, on a chilly afternoon, I saw a familiar car pull up the dirt path. It was David. He stepped out, looking thinner and tired, the sharp edges of arrogance replaced with something softer, sadder. For a moment, we just looked at each other. There was no courtroom, no audience, no pretense, just brother and sister, standing in the wind. He cleared his throat. He heard you reopened the community project. I nodded. You heard right. He kicked at the dirt. I wanted to come sooner, but I didn't know how. You could have just said sorry, I said quietly. He met my eyes. I am sorry, Emma, for everything. I thought I was being smart, but I was just being greedy. When the project failed and the investors pulled out, I lost more than money. I lost you. For a long moment, I said nothing. The anger I once carried had dulled, replaced with something gentler. Not forgiveness yet, but understanding. I finally said, family is about second chances. This land's about building things that last. Maybe that includes us. He looked surprised, then smiled faintly. Do you mean that? I do, but you'll have to earn it. Help me finish what Dad started. He nodded, eyes glassy. I'd like that. Working beside my brother again wasn't easy at first. There were awkward silences, cautious conversations, and the occasional clash of old habits. But slowly, something shifted. He listened more, I trusted more, and together we began to build something beautiful. Not the luxury resort he once dreamed of, but a living tribute to our father's legacy. By spring, the community center was complete. We held the opening ceremony beneath the old oak tree where Dad used to rest. Children ran through the fields, laughter ringing through the air, and the townspeople gathered around a plaque we'd placed at the entrance, in memory of Thomas Walters, who believed in land, legacy, and love that lasts. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium and took a deep breath. My father once told me that the measure of a life isn't in what you own, but in what you leave behind for others. Today, this land isn't just ours, it's everyone's. It's proof that no betrayal, no loss, no mistake is too deep to be healed by love and time. As I looked out at the crowd, I saw David standing near the back, wiping at his eyes. I smiled. Maybe we'd never erase the past, but we were writing a better future. That night, I sat alone on the porch again, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. The land glowed faintly under the moonlight, alive and whole. I thought of Dad, of the battles we'd fought, and of the woman I'd become, stronger, wiser, still standing. The phone buzzed beside me. A message from David. Thanks for not giving up on me. I typed back simply, family means we keep trying. Then I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of soil and spring rain, and let peace settle where pain once lived. Because in the end, the land had taught me something Dad always knew. When you plant forgiveness, you grow freedom. When you fight for what's right, you grow roots that even betrayal can't tear up. And when you finally learn to let go, that's when you truly come home.